UFC Fight Night. Ailin versus Craig just went down. You guys know the drill. This is Casual Roundhouse Fight Talk Recap Edition. A lot of finishes in general on this card. Also, a lot of my picks from my last video wound up being correct, which is encouraging. But there's also a couple of fights that require a little bit more of an in-depth breakdown in recap. But we're not going to waste any more time jumping right into the first fight of the card. Rafael Estevam, impressive in his debut, getting a decision win over Charles Johnson. Charles Johnson bounced back strong in the third round, landing some damaging strikes, but Estevam did enough, dominating the first 2 rounds to bank them in the eyes of the judges and secure a decision in his debut, and that's a correct pick for your boy. Trey Ogden versus Nikolas Motta. This is one of those fights that, like I said, requires a little bit more attention. I picked Nikolas Motta to win, and Trey Ogden was pulling away with it as the fight progressed and came down the stretch. And late in the third round, Ogden found himself locking in an arm triangle, and Motta was not tapping, and he was still conscious, but the referee stepped in and stopped it regardless. And the fight was declared a no contest. So, had that submission happened with Motta tapping or going unconscious, or the fight going to a decision, Ogden would have won either way, and it would have been an incorrect pick. So that's 1 correct and 1 incorrect to start off the card. Another incorrect pick, Ailin Perez dominating the grappling against Lucie Pudilova to a decision victory. First 2 rounds were convincing enough despite some visible damage on her face. And we also got some celebratory twerking. Here's where the correct picks start rolling in. Jeka Saragih, I said in his road to UFC final against Anheliger that there was a potential injury that he went into that fight with, because it was not the Saragih that I remember watching in the road to UFC tournament itself. And that proved to be the case with an impressive first round TKO that Saragih got. And it reminded me of the version that I recall watching in that tournament. A correct pick for your boy, and an impressive bounce back finish win for Saragih. Mick Parkin doing enough, accumulating enough control time in the eyes of the judges to secure a decision win over Machado. There were people online who felt as though Machado should have won the fight, considering he landed more damaging strikes on the in-betweens of the grappling exchanges, but a large majority of this fight consisted of Mick Parkin controlling Machado on the ground. So that's another correct pick and another win for the undefeated heavyweight in Mick Parkin. Christian LeRoy Duncan systematically, impressively, and effectively breaking down his late replacement opponent in Denis Tiuliulin with a sequence of strikes for a TKO finish in the second round. He was originally supposed to fight Cesar Almeida, and I think that the fact that he stayed on the card, got the replacement opponent, and finished him is encouraging and promising, and that he will more than likely be booked against Almeida again. But this is a promising win for him in his career trajectory, and another correct pick. Jose Johnson versus Chad Anheliger. Jose Johnson, with a frantic back and forth, high-paced 3-round scrap against Anheliger, who hung tough the entire time, finds a late submission, 10 seconds to go in the fight, and finds that rear naked choke. Impressive performance, promising win, bounce back win for Johnson, and another correct pick. Joanderson Brito versus Jonathan Pearce. Brito was struggling with the grappling of Pearce, who was controlling him along the cage. And late in the second round, Brito snuck in a slick little ninja choke and found a submission that Pearce wasn't expecting. And it was very obvious, and it was slick, and it caught me off guard. And it hyped me up because it kept my streak of correct picks alive. But nonetheless, Joanderson Brito versus Dan Ige, I think, is an intriguing matchup with him coming off of that win and being that guy who's right on the cusp of top 15 opposition. We move on to the main card. Myktybek Orolbai in his short notice debut. The Kyrgyzstani secures an impressive second round submission against Uros Medic. This was an incorrect pick. I favored Medic. I thought the momentum from his win against Semmelsberger would favor him against a late replacement, and it didn't. Orolbai showed dangerous striking leading up to this fight, and he came into the matchup with a grappling heavy approach and secured a submission. Following the win, he also announced that he plans on moving down to lightweight, which is very intriguing in my opinion. So, impressive and promising win for the debuting Kyrgyzstani prospect. Luana Pinheiro versus Amanda Ribas. This was a great fight. Ribas withstood early damage from Pinheiro and started mixing up the looks on the feet as the fight progressed, and Pinheiro was unable to adjust and continue landing damage and just wore down as the fight progressed. It was obvious that Ribas was capable of withstanding the same pace from start to finish, whereas Pinheiro was not. And she was setting up a spinning back kick, was Ribas, to the body originally, and then went up top with it and landed flush, which led to the finishing sequence. And another correct pick and one of the more entertaining fights on this card. I highly recommend you go back and watch it if you didn't. And Ribas is in an interesting position because this is a win at strawweight, and I think that a fight against Amanda Lemos, who's a former title challenger, or Tatiana Suarez, who's undefeated and seemingly unstoppable, is justifiable considering the momentum that Ribas has at strawweight at the moment. Payton Talbott versus Nikigiri. I said this would be a toss-up fight. Nikigiri gave Talbott problems in that first round. It seemed as though he gave everything that he had trying to get the finish in the first round, and then just was incapable of withstanding that same pace as the fight progressed, whereas Talbott was methodical and just broke Aguirre down systematically and very nonchalantly, it seemed. But nonetheless, Talbott found that finish early on in the third round with the submission. Impressive debut victory for Talbott, who's still very young and has like 7 fights on his MMA record as a whole. And I think that it would make sense for the UFC to try and match Talbott up against Dan Argueta just because they share the common opponent in Nick Aguirre. And Aguirre gave Argueta all sorts of problems for the duration of their fight, whereas Talbott was able to systematically find a finish. Chase Hooper versus Jordan Levitt. Another correct pick for your boy. Chase Hooper, one step ahead in the scrambles and found an impressive first round submission. A rear naked choke, that is. A lot of rear naked choke finishes on this card. Nonetheless, Hooper looks like he's found his home at 155, and in my opinion, I think that the UFC should try and match him up against Mateusz Rebecki. Only reason being, they share a common opponent in Nick Fiore, and the manner in which they both beat Fiore is relatively similar, with Hooper's striking being a bigger difference maker in his win than Rebecki's striking was in his win. So I just think stylistically that'd be an intriguing matchup. And I'd like to see if Chase Hooper is able to adapt a little bit away from his jiu-jitsu off of his back to win against a bulldozer like Rebecki, who I understand is pushing for a top 15 opponent after his win against Roosevelt Roberts, but I think Chase Hooper is a tougher test than Roosevelt Roberts. Co-main event, Michael Morales proving that he is a true blue chip undefeated prospect, going the distance in a tough technical scrap against Jake Matthews. Jake Matthews stuck to his guns, hung tough, and landed his strikes, but Morales just seemed in control throughout the duration of this fight, and every time that Matthews landed a nice little combination, Morales would land a damaging, thudding strike that would legitimately back Matthews off him and make Matthews hesitate to re-enter. Good experience for Morales. The fight went the distance, and he was forced to fight his way out of some tough spots. I still feel as though Morales should get another matchup outside the top 15. And I think a good matchup would be Nicolas Dalby, who is coming off of a massive win against formerly undefeated Gabriel Bonfim and is also pushing for a ranked opponent. And I think a win for either of those guys warrants a ranked opponent next. To the main event we go. Brendan Allen giving me another correct pick with a third round submission over Paul Craig. I said in my previous video I felt as though Brendan Allen was hungrier, he had more dog in him, and he withstood all the early grappling threats that Paul Craig usually presents and stayed heavy on top, landed some solid ground and pound, and eventually found that rear naked choke. He also called for a matchup against Jared Cannonier, which I think makes sense. I said also that if Brendan Allen were to win this fight, he would deserve a top 5 opponent that could potentially propel him into title contention. So if he does get matched up with Jared Cannonier and beat Jared Cannonier, the storyline for the rematch between him and Sean Strickland is incredibly intriguing. Let me know what you guys thought about this card. I thought it was a relatively solid card, all things considered. There's no UFC card this upcoming weekend because it's the holiday week, but we're right back at it with the Dariush versus Sarukian card to start December. Appreciate you guys watching as usual. This is Casual Roundhouse Fight Talk, and we'll see you in the next one.